Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamyang. I'll be leading this lesson on the Jatakas. We've just got 2 more lessons for the year, this evening and then next week. So Rinpoche has asked me to sit in to lead as he's busy himself. So we'll begin as usual with the prayers of refuge and bodhicitta and the 4 immeasurables. Just to create a particular sort of atmosphere or environment for us to be able to absorb and be receptive to the teachings. So I'll lead with prayers. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. May all beings have happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows their suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness in the cause of the happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. According to the intelligence and predisposition of all beings, we ask that you turn the Dharma wheel of great, low and common vehicles. So Jataka, as you may notice, sometimes it's just written with English letters, but sometimes you notice the first A has what's called a macron on top of it, a horizontal bar. This means that it's pronounced for twice as long as the other syllables. So it's actually Jataka. This literally means birth, relating to the birth. So birth stories or former lives of the Buddha. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been reading from the Pali Text Society translation, which is quite an old one, from the late 19th century. So the Jatakas is considered as a genre, one of the oldest in Buddhist literature. And in each birth, the Buddha, as a Bodhisattva, takes a different form, whether a different type of animal or a different type of profession of person. And then he exhibits some type of virtue during his life, and then he moves to the next one, which is hopefully what we, especially if we've taken Bodhisattva vows of some kind, can do with our life. And of course, many people do without taking such formal vows or without being Buddhist even, recognize to some extent what they can do with their life, how they can help, and then move on. And in the Buddhist way of understanding things, we move on to another place according to what will be relevant and beneficial. And as far as the Jatakas go, every story has a happy ending. And the Jatakas are also based on the idea that the Buddha has been able, through his enlightenment or awakening, to recollect all his past lives. And he therefore uses these memories, what we may call authoritative memories, to tell a story that illustrates the teachings. As you've probably noticed, each particular chapter has a same plot, threefold plot structure. First, it illustrates the present narrative, what's going on in the Buddha's community in this particular life, in his final life. And then he relates the past narrative, what happened in a past life that helps us understand what's going on now. And then at the very end, he links the two. He says he identifies from the past who in the past is the protagonist, and in relation to the present ones. So that's a very sort of common structure that each of these stories has. So these Jatakas hopefully illustrate to us, as those who have taken Bodhisattva vows especially, what it means to be a Bodhisattva. Maybe we can't do everything in this life, but definitely, hopefully we can make some sort of a dent, so to speak, make some sort of an imprint in our minds, in our mental consciousness, in our mental continuum, our mind stream, so to speak. And this is the sort of epitome of Buddhist values. We do what we can in this life. Maybe there's more to work on in the next one. So I thought that would be a good way to introduce the teachings this evening. We'll continue on from last week. So we're up to Jataka number 12. We read the introduction, but we didn't have time to read the actual story, so I'll read the plot summary first. It's called the Nigrodhamiga Jataka. Deer in a royal park, to avoid being hunted, decide that lots shall be cast to select a daily victim. The lot having fallen on a doe big with young, the king of the deer offers himself as a substitute at the block and saves not only his own life, but also the lives of all living creatures. This is a relatively long story, about 3 pages. Once on a time, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born as a deer. At his birth he was golden of hue, his eyes were like round jewels, the sheen of his horns was as of silver, his mouth was red as a bunch of scarlet cloth, his 4 hoofs were as though lacquered, his tail was like the yak's, and he was as big as a young foal. Attended by 500 deer, he dwelt in the forest under the name of King Banyan deer. And hard by him dwelt another deer, also with an attendant herd of 500 deer, who was named Branch Deer and was as golden of hue as the Bodhisattva. In those days the king of Benares was passionately fond of hunting, and always had meat at every meal. Every day he mustered the whole of his subjects, townfolk and country folk alike, to the detriment of their business, and went hunting. Thought his people, this king of ours stops all our work. Suppose we were to sow food and supply water for the deer in his own pleasaunce, and, having driven in a number of deer, to bar them in and deliver them over to the king. So they sowed in the pleasaunce grass for the deer to eat, and supplied water for them to drink, and opened the gate wide. Then they called out the townsfolk and set out into the forest, armed with sticks and all manner of weapons to find the deer. They surrounded about a league of forest in order to catch the deer within their circle, and in so doing surrounded the haunt of the banyan and the branch deer. As soon as they perceived the deer, they proceeded to beat the trees, bushes and ground with their sticks, till they drove the herds out of their lairs. Then they rattled their swords and spears and bows with so great a din that they drove all the deer into the pleasaunce and shut the gate. Then they went to the king and said, "Sire, you put a stop to our work by always going a-hunting. So we have driven deer long enough from the forest to fill your pleasaunce. Henceforth feed on them." Hereupon the king betook himself to the pleasaunce, and in looking over the herd saw among them 2 golden deer, to whom he granted immunity. Sometimes he would go of his own accord and shoot a deer to bring home. Sometimes his cook would go and shoot one. At first sight of the bow, the deer would dash off trembling for their lives, but after receiving 2 or 3 wounds, They grew weary and faint and were slain. The herd of the deer told this to the Bodhisattva, who sent for Branch and said, "Friend, the deer are being destroyed in great numbers, and, though they cannot escape death, at least let them not be needlessly wounded. Let the deer go to the block by turns. One day one, but from my herd, and next day one from yours. The deer on whom the lot falls to goes to the place of execution and lie down with its head on the block. In this wise the deer will escape wounding." The other agreed, and thenceforth the deer whose turn it was used to go and lie down with his neck ready on the block. The cook used to go and carry off only the victim which awaited him. Now one day the lot fell on a pregnant doe of the herd of Branch, and she went to the Branch and said, "Lord, I am with young. When I have brought forth my little one, there will be two of us to take our turn. Order me to be passed over this turn." "No, I cannot make your turn another's," said he. "You must bear the consequences of your own fortune. Be gone." Finding no favour with him, the doe went on to the Bodhisattva and told him her story. And he answered, "Very well, you go away, and I will see that the turn passes over you." And therewithal he went himself to the place of execution, and lay down with his head on the block. Cried the cook on seeing him, "Why, here's the king of the deer who was granted immunity. What does this mean?" And he ran off he ran to tell the king. The moment he heard of it, the king mounted his chariot and arrived with a large following. "My friend the king of the deer," he said, on beholding the Bodhisattva, "did I not promise you your life? How comes it that you are lying here?" "Sir, there came to me a doe big with young, who prayed me to let her turn fall on another, and, as I could not pass the doom of one on to another, I, laying down my life for her and taking her doom on myself, have laid me down here. Think not that there is anything behind this, your majesty." "My lord, the golden king of the deer," said the king, "never yet saw I, even among men, one so abounding in charity, love and pity as you. Therefore am I pleased with you. Arise, I spare the lives both of you and of her. Though to be spared, what shall the rest do, O king of men?" "I spare their lives too, my lord." "Sire, only the deer in your pleasaunce will thus have grand immunity. What shall all the rest do?" "Their lives too I spare, my lord." "Sire, deer will thus be safe, but what will the rest of four-footed creatures do?" "I spare their lives too, my lord." "Sire, four-footed creatures will thus be safe, but what will the flock of birds do?" "They too shall be spared, my lord." "Sire, birds will thus be safe, but what will the fishes do who live in the water?" "I spare their lives also, my lord." After thus interceding with the king for the lives of all creatures, the great being arose, established the king in the 5 commandments, that's the 5 main precepts for lay people, saying, "Walk in righteousness, great king. Walk in righteousness and justice towards parents, children, townsmen and country folk, so that when this earthly body is dissolved, you can enter the bliss of heaven." Thus, with the grace and charm that marks a Buddha, did he teach the truth to the king. A few days he tarried in the pleasaunce for the king's instruction, and then with his attendant herd he passed into the forest again. And that doe brought forth a fawn, fair as the opening bud of the lotus, who used to play about with the branch deer. Seeing this, his mother said to him, "My child, don't go about with him, only go about with the herd of the banyan deer." And by way of exhortation, she repeated this stanza: "Keep only with the banyan tree, and shun the branch deer herds. More welcome far is death, my child, in banyan's company, than even the amplest term of life with branch." Thenceforth the deer, now in the enjoyment of immunity, used to eat men's crops, and the men, remembering the immunity granted to them, did not dare to hit the deer or drive them away. So they assembled in the king's courtyard and laid the matter before the king. Said he, "When the banyan tree won my favour, I promised him a boon. I will forego my kingdom rather than my promise. Begone, not a man in my kingdom may harm the deer." But when this came to the ears of the banyan deer, he called his herd together and said, "Henceforth you should not eat the crops of others." And having thus forbidden them, he sent a message to the men, saying, "From this day forward, let no husbandman fence his field, but merely indicate it with the leaves tied up around it." And so we here began a plan of tying up leaves to indicate the fields. And never was a deer known to trespass on a field so marked, for thus they had been instructed by the Bodhisattva. Thus did the Bodhisattva exhort the deer of his herd, and thus did he act all his life long, and at the close of the long life passed away with them to fare according to his deserts. The king too abode by the Bodhisattva's teachings, and after a life spent in good works passed away to fare according to his deserts. So as we see in this story, the Buddha even in this life did a little bit of teaching, not as his main activity perhaps, but definitely something there. At the close of this lesson, so it says at the end, that having finished the story, that when the master had repeated that, as now, so in bygone days also, had he been the salvation of the pair, he preached the four truths. He then showed the connection, linking together the two stories that he had told, and identified the birth by saying, Devadatta was the branch deer of those days, and his followers were that deer's herd. The nun was the doe, and Prince Kassapa was her offspring. Ananda was the king, and I myself, the king Panyan deer. Seeing as I already taught a little bit of Sanskrit about the long vowels in this lesson, I thought I'd mention as well, when we talk about the Buddha's disciple Ananda, it's pronounced with the emphasis, if not twice the length. See, the first A has a bar over it, Ananda. Actually, if we say with a short A, like we're probably used to saying, Ananda, that actually means no joy, which is a very bad name to have. If you say Ananda, it means something like one who enjoys. So Nanda by itself means joy. Ananda means to enjoy. But then if you say Atnanda with a short A, that actually makes it an opposite, so it means joyless. So good to say Ananda with the emphasis on the first syllable. We're lucky actually because Sanskrit is relatively similar to, it's in the same language group, Indo-European, as English. So apart from maybe the aspiration after some consonants, which is a bit hard for us to notice, but apart from that really, it's quite easy for us, particularly compared to Tibetans, to pronounce Sanskrit. So that's story 12. Let's look at 13. It's called Kandina Jataka. A mountain stag, enamoured of a doe, is by her allowed to fall a prey to a hunter. The doe escapes. This is just a short one-page story. So the introduction begins, "Cursed be the dart of love." This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about the temptation caused to brethren, the Sangha, by the wives of their mundane life. This will be related in the Indriya Jataka in the 8th book. Said the Blessed One to the brother, "Brother, it was because of this very woman that in bygone days you met your death and were roasted over glowing embers." The brethren asked the Blessed One to explain this. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from them by rebirth. So begins the story. Once upon a time in the kingdom of Magadha, the king was reigning in Rajagaha, and when the crops were grown, the deer were exposed to great perils, so that they retired to the forest. Now a certain mountain stag of the forest, having become attached to a doe who came from a nearer village, was moved by his love for her to accompany her when the deer returned home from the forest. Said she, "You, sir, are but a simple stag of the forest, and the neighbourhood of villages is beset with peril and danger, so don't come down with us." But he, because of his great love for her, would not stay, but came with her. When they knew that it was the time for the deer to come down from the hills, the Magadha folk posted themselves in ambush by the road, and a hunter was lying in wait just by the road along which the pair were travelling. Scenting a man, the young doe suspected that a hunter was in ambush, and let the stag go on first, following herself at some distance. With a single arrow the hunter laid the stag low, and the doe, seeing him struck, was off like the wind. Then that hunter came forth from his hiding place, and skinned the stag, and lighting a fire, cooked the sweet flesh over the embers. Having eaten and drunk, he took off home the remainder of the bleeding carcass on his carrying pole to regale his children. Now in those days the Bodhisattva was a fairy dwelling in that very grove of trees, and he marked what had come to pass. 'Twas not father or mother, but passion alone that destroyed this foolish deer. The dawn of passion is bliss, but its end is sorrow and suffering. The painful loss of hands, and the misery of the 5 forms of bonds and blows. To cause another's death is accounted infamy in this world. Infamy too is the land which owns a woman's sway and rule, and infamous are the men who yield themselves to women's dominion. And therewithal, while the other fairies of the wood applauded and offered perfumes and flowers and the like in homage, the Bodhisattva wove the 3 infamies into a single stanza, and made the wood re-echo with his sweet tones as he taught the truth in these lines. Cursed be the dart of love that works men pain. Cursed be the land and cursed the fool. Thus in a single stanza were the 3 infamies comprised by the Bodhisattva, and the woods re-echoed as he taught the truth with the mastery and grace of a Buddha. His lesson ended, the Master preached the 4 truths, at the close whereof the lovesick brother was established in the fruit of the first path. Having told the 2 stories, the Master showed the connection linking the 2 together, and identified the birth. In those days, said the Master, the lovesick brother was the mountain stag, his mundane wife was the young doe, and I myself the fairy who preached the truth, showing the sin of passion. So of course we have to remember these stories were taught when most of the disciples were men. So we can obviously apply the same for those students who are of the other gender. So we'll move on to story 14, which is called the Vatamiga Jataka. By a bait of honeyed grass, a wild antelope is lured by slow degrees into a palace. The introduction goes, there's nothing worse. This story was told by the Master while at Jetavana about the elder Tissa, called Direct Alms the Less. Tradition says that, while the Master was dwelling at the bamboo grove near Rajagoha, the scion of a wealthy house, Prince Tissa by name, coming one day to the bamboo grove and there hearing a discourse from the Master, wished to join the brotherhood, but, being refused because his parents would not give their consent, obtained their consent by following Ratapala's example and refusing food for 7 days, and finally took the vows with the Master. About a fortnight after admitting this young man, the Master repaired from the bamboo grove to Jetavana, where the young nobleman undertook the 13 obligations. There's a footnote there. These are meritorious ascetic practices for quelling of the passions, of which the third is an undertaking to eat no food except alms received direct from the giver in a brother's alms bowl, and pass his time in going his round for alms from house to house, omitting none. Under the name of the elder Tissa direct alms, the less, he became as bright and shining as a light in Buddhism as the moon in the vault of heaven. A festival having been proclaimed at this time in Rajagaha, the elder's mother and father laid in a silver casket the trinkets he used to wear as a layman, and took it to heart, bewailing thus: "At other festivals our son used to wear this or that bravery as he kept the festival, and he, our only son, has been taken away by the sage Gautama," that's the Buddha, to the town of Savatthi, that's Shravasti in Sanskrit. "Where is our son, sitting now or standing?" Now a slave girl who came to the house noticed the lady of the house weeping, and asked why she was weeping, and the lady told her all. "What, madam, was your son fond of?" "Of such and such a thing," replied the lady. "Well, if you will give me authority in this house, I'll fetch your son back." "Very good," said the lady in assent, and gave the girl her expenses, and dispatched her with a large following, saying, "Go and manage to fetch my son back." So away the girl rode in a palanquin to Savatthi, where she took up her residence in the street which the elder used to frequent for alms. Surrounding herself with servants of her own, and never allowing the elder to see the father's people about, she watched the moment when the elder entered the street, and at once bestowed on him an alms of victual and drink. Victual means like a meal. It's an old-fashioned word. And when she had bound him in the bonds of the craving of taste, she got him eventually to seat himself in the house, till she knew that her gifts of food and as alms had been put in her power. Then she feigned sickness and lay down in an inner chamber. In the due course of his round for alms at the proper time, the elder came to the door of her house, and her people took the elder's bowl and made him sit down in the house. When he had seated himself, he said, "Where is the lay sister?" "She's gone ill, sir. She would be glad to see you." Bound as he was by the bonds of the craving of taste, he broke his vow and obligation, and went to where the woman was lying. Then she told him the reason of her coming, and so wrought on him that, all because of his being bound by the bonds of craving of taste, she made him forsake the brotherhood. When he was in her power, she put him in the palanquin and came back with a large following to Rajagaha again. All this was noised abroad. Sitting in the hall of truth, the brethren discussed the matter, saying, "Sirs, it is reported that a slave girl has bound in the bonds of the craving of taste and has carried off the elder Tissa the less, called direct alms." Entering the hall, the master sat down on his jewelled seat and said, "What, brethren, is the subject of the discussion in this conclave?" They told him the incident. "Brethren," said he, "this is not the first time that, in bondage to the craving of taste, he has fallen into her power. In bygone days, he too fell into her power in like manner." And in so saying, he told the story of the past. So begins the past story. Once on a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, he had a gardener named Sanjaya. Now there came into the king's pleasaunce a wind antelope, which fled away at the sight of Sanjaya, but the latter let it go without terrifying the timid creature. After several visits, the antelope used to roam about in the pleasaunce. Now the gardener was in the habit of gathering flowers and fruits and taking them day by day to the king. Said the king to him one day, "Have you noticed anything strange, friend gardener, in this pleasaunce?" "Only, sir, that a wind antelope has come about the grounds." Could you catch it, do you think? Oh yes, if I had a little honey, I'd bring it right into your Majesty's palace. The king ordered the honey to be given to the man, and he went off with it to the pleasaunce, where he first anointed with the honey the grass at the spots frequented by the antelope, and then hid himself. When the antelope came and tasted the honeyed grass, it was so snared by the lust of taste that it would go nowhere else but only to the pleasaunce. I think we can see where the story is going. Marking the success of his snare, the gardener began gradually to show himself. The appearance of the man made the antelope take to flight for the first day or two, but growing familiar with the sight of him, it gathered confidence and gradually came to eat grass from the man's hand. He, noting that the creature's confidence had been won, first strewed the path as thick as a carpet with broken boughs. Then, tying a gourd full of honey on his shoulder and sticking a bunch of grass in his waistcloth, he kept dropping wisps of the honeyed grass in front of the antelope, till at last he got it right inside the palace. No sooner was the antelope inside than they shut the door. At sight of men, the antelope, in fear and trembling for its life, dashed to and fro about the hall. And the king, coming down from his chamber above, and seeing the trembling creature, said, "So timid is the wind antelope that for a whole week it will not revisit a spot where it has so much as seen a man. And if it has once been frightened anywhere, it never goes back there again all its life long. Yet, ensnared by the lust of taste, this wild thing from the jungle has actually come to a place like this. Truly, my friends, there is nothing viler in the world than this lust of taste." And he put his teaching into this stanza. "There's nothing worse, men say, than taste to snare, at home with one's friends, or with one's friends. Lo, taste it was, that unto Sanjaya delivered up the jungle-haunting antelope so wild." And with these words he let the antelope go back into its forest again. So ends the story. When the master had ended this lesson, and had repeated what he had said as to that brother's having fallen into that woman's power in bygone days as well as in the present time, he showed the connection and identified the birth by saying, "In those days this slave girl was Sanjaya, direct arms the less was the wind antelope, and I myself was the king of Benares." That ends number 14. Number 15 is called Karadiya Jataka, and the summary of it is: a deer which would not come to be taught the ruses of a deer is caught in a trap. For when a deer. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about an unruly brother. Tradition says that this brother was unruly and would not heed admonition. Accordingly, the master asked him, saying, "Is it true, as they say, that you are unruly and will not heed admonition?" "It is true, Blessed One," was the reply. "So too in bygone days," said the master, "you were unruly and would not heed the admonition of the wise and the good, with the result that you were caught in a jinn, G-I-N, I'm not sure of that word, and met your death." And so saying, he told this story of the past. Once on a time when Brahmadatta was in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born a deer and dwelt in the forest at the head of a herd of deer. His sister brought her son to him, saying, "Brother, this is your nephew. Teach him deer's ruses." I think ruse means something like lesson. And thus she placed her son under the Bodhisattva's care. Said the latter to his nephew, "Come at such and such a time, and I will give you a lesson." But the nephew made no appearance at the time appointed. And, as on that day, so on several 7 days did he skip his lesson and fail to learn the ruses of deer. And at last, as he was roaming about, he was caught in a gin. His mother came and said to the Bodhisattva, "Brother, was not your nephew taught deer's ruses?" "Take no thought for the unteachable rascal," said the Bodhisattva. "Your son failed to learn the ruses of deer." And in so saying, having lost all desire to advise the scapegrace even in his deadly peril, he repeated this stanza. "For when a deer has twice 4 hoops to run, and branching antlers armed with countless tines, and when by 7 tricks he saved himself, I teach him then, Karadiya no more." But the hunter killed the self-willed deer that was caught in the snare, and departed with its flesh. When the master had ended this lesson in support of what he had said as to the unruliness of the brother in bygone days, as well as in the present, he showed the connection and identified the birth by saying, "In those days, this unruly brother was the nephew deer. Upalavana was the sister." I think it was last week I mentioned if there's a long vowel at the end, long as particularly, Upalavana, like this one, it makes it female rather than male. So in other words, the name for Tara, the goddess, is Tara. If you say Tara with a short A at the end, it's male. So in those days, this unruly brother was the nephew deer, the one who didn't take the lessons. Upalavana was the sister, and I myself the deer who gave the admonition. So we're doing pretty well here. We're reading close to 20 pages a week, which is good. We'll move from this one to number 16. 16 is called Tipala Tamiga Jataka. Another deer one. A deer which had learned the ruses of deer, being caught in a snare, affects its escape. As it begins, in all 3 postures. This story was told by the master while dwelling in the Bhadaraka monastery in Kosambi about the elder Rahula, whose heart was set on observing the rules of the brotherhood. Once when the master was dwelling in the Agalava temple hard by the town of Alavi, many female lay disciples and sisters used to flock thither to hear the truth preached. The preaching was in the daytime, but as time wore on, the women did not attend, and there were only brethren and men disciples present. Then the preaching took place in the evening, and at the close the elder brethren retired each to his own chamber. But the younger ones with the lay disciples lay down to rest in the service hall. When they fell asleep, loud was the snoring and snorting and gnashing of teeth as they lay. After a short slumber some got up and reported to the Blessed One, the Buddha, the impropriety of which they had witnessed. Said he, "If a brother sleeps in the company of novices, it is a pachitya offence." That's a type of offence. It's pronounced slightly differently in Sanskrit. This is the Pali, meaning one that requires a confession and absolution. There are different degrees of offence. And after delivering this precept, he went away to Kosambi. There's an interesting thing about the precepts. The Buddha didn't have the precepts, preordained. He didn't say what the precepts weren't there from day one. The precepts came about because monastics made some mistake, and then the Buddha enforced the precept. And there's actually stories. Looks like this might touch on one. There are stories in the Vinaya which are all about why the precepts came to be. Thereon the brethren said to the blessed Reverend Rahula, "Sir, the Blessed One has laid down this precept, and now you will please find quarters of your own." Now, before this, the brethren, out of respect for the father and because of the anxious desire of the son to observe the rules of the brotherhood, had welcomed the youth as if the place were his. Rahula here is Buddha's actual biological son. They had fitted up a little bed for him and had given him a cloth to make a pillow with. But on the day of our story, they would not even give him house room, so fearful were they of transgressing. The excellent Rahula went neither to the Buddha as being his father, nor to Sariputta, as Pali would say Shariputra, captain of the faith. It's a cute way of translating. As being his preceptor. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. When his son wanted to become a monk, when he was grown up, Buddha purposely didn't preside over the ceremony himself, because he didn't want it to appear as though it was some special thing with his son. So he got one of his senior disciples, Shariputra, to do the honours of being the preceptor, just so that there was no idea of a sort of a family inheritance involved in it, which is a wise thing, I would imagine, I think. Nor to the great Moggallana, that's Buddha's second closest disciple, as being his teacher, Rahula's teacher that is, nor to the elder Ananda, as being his uncle. Yeah, see, Ananda was Buddha's stepbrother, I think. So he was Rahula's uncle. But betook himself to the Buddha's jakes, and took up his abode there, I'm not sure what jakes means, as though in a heavenly mansion. Now in a Buddha's jakes the door is always closely shut, the levelled floor is of perfumed earth, flowers and garlands are festooned round the walls, and all night long a lamp burns there. But it was not this splendour which prompted Rahula to take up his residence here. Nay, it was simply because the brethren had told him to find quarters for himself, and because he reverenced instruction and yearned to observe the rules of the order. Indeed, from time to time, the brethren, to test him, when they saw him coming from quite a distance, used to throw down a hand broom or a little dust sweepings, and then ask who had thrown it down, after Rahula had come in. "Well, Rahula came that way," would be the remark, but never did the future elder say he knew nothing about it. On the contrary, he used to remove the litter and humbly ask pardon of the brother, nor go away till he was assured that he was pardoned. So anxious was he to observe the rules. And it was solely this anxiety which made him take up his dwelling in the jakes. Now, though day had not yet dawned, the master halted at the door of the jakes and coughed. "Ahem," responded the Reverend Rahula. "Who is there?" said the Buddha. "It is I, Rahula," was the reply, and out came the young man and bowed low. "Why have you been sleeping here, Rahula?" "Because I had nowhere to go. Up till now, sir, the brethren have been very kind to me, but such is their present fear of erring that they won't give me shelter any more. Consequently, I took up my abode here because I thought it a spot where I should not come into contact with anybody else." Then thought the master to himself, "If they treat even Rahula like this, what will they not do to other youths whom they admit to the order?" And his heart was moved from within for the truth. So at an early hour he had the brethren assembled and questioned the captain of the faith thus. Captain of the faith was Shariputra. "I suppose you at all events, Shariputra, know where Rahula is now quartered?" "No, sir, I do not." "Sariputta, Rahula was living this day in the jakes." "Sariputta, if you treat Rahula like this, What will not be your treatment of other youths whom you admit to the order? Such treatment will not retain those who join us. In future, keep your novices in your own quarters for a day or two, and only on the third day let them lodge out, taking care to acquaint yourself with their lodging. With this rider, the master laid down the precept. Gathering together in the hall of truth, the brethren spoke of the goodness of Rahula. See, sirs, how anxious was Rahula to observe the rules. When told to find his own lodging, he did not say, I am the son of the Buddha. What have you to do with the quarters? You turn out. No, not a single brother did he oust, but quartered himself in the jakes. As they were talking thus, the master came out to the hall and took his seat on his throne of state, saying, What is the subject of your talk, brethren? Sir, was the reply, we were talking of the anxiety of Rahula to keep the rules, nothing else. Then said the master, This anxiety ruler has shown not only now, but also in the past, when he had been born an animal. And so saying, he told this story of the past. Once on a time, a certain king of Magadha was reigning in Rajagaha, and in those days the Bodhisattva, having been born a stag, was living in the forest at the head of a herd of deer. Now his sister brought her own son to him, saying, Brother, teach your nephew here the ruses of deer. Certainly, said the Bodhisattva. Now go away now, my boy, and come back at such and such a time to be taught. Punctually at the time his uncle mentioned, the young stag was there and received instructions in the ruses of deer. One day as he was ranging the woods, he was caught in a snare and uttered the plaintive cry of a captive. Away fled the herd and told the mother of her son's capture. She came to her brother and asked him whether his nephew had been taught the ruses of deer. Fear not, your son is not at fault, said the Bodhisattva. He has learnt thoroughly deer's ruses, and will come back straight away to your great rejoicing. And so saying, he repeated this stanza. In all three postures, on his back or sides, your son is versed, he is trained to use 8 hoofs. And save at midnight never slakes his thirst. And as he lies couched on earth, he lifeless seems, and only with his under nostril breathes. 6 tricks my nephew knows to cheat his foes. This must be the lessons that are being taught. Thus did the Bodhisattva console his sister by showing her how thoroughly her son had mastered the ruses of the deer. Meantime the young stag, on being caught in the snare, did not struggle, but lay down at full length on his side, with his legs stretched out, taut and rigid. He pawed up the ground round his hooves, so as to shower the grass and earth about, relieved nature, let his head fall, lolled out his tongue, beslavered his body all over, swelled himself out by drawing in the wind, turned up his eyes, breathed only with the lower nostril, holding his breath with the upper one, and made himself generally so rigid and so stiff, so as to look like a corpse. Even the blue bottles swarmed round him, and here and there crows settled. The hunter came up and smacked the stag on the belly with his hand, remarking, He must have been caught early this morning. He's going bad already. So saying, the man loosed the stag from his bonds, saying to himself, I'll cut him up here where he lies, and take the flesh home with me. But as the man guilelessly set to work to gather sticks and leaves to make a fire with, the young stag rose to his feet, shook himself, stretched out his neck, and like a little cloud scudding before a mighty wind, sped swiftly back to his mother. So ends the story. After repeating what he had said as to Rahula's having shown no less anxiety in times past to keep rules than in present, the master made the connection and identified their birth by saying, Rahula was the young stag of those days. Upalavana, see the emphasis or the length, double length of the last syllable, his mother, because it's a female, and I, the stag, his uncle. Number 17. We're more than halfway through the lesson now. Maluta Jataka. A tiger and a lion dispute whether it is the dark or the light half of the month which is cold. Sounds interesting. In light or dark. This story was told by the master while at Jatakamala about two brethren who had joined the brotherhood in their old age. Tradition says that they were living in a forest dwelling in the Kosala country, and that one was named the elder dark and the other the elder light. Now one day light said to dark, "Sir, at what time does what is called cold appear?" "It appears in the dark half of the month." It's talking about the lunar months. And one day dark said to light, "Sir, at what time does the cold what is cold appear?" "It appears in the light half of the month." As a pair of, this is when it's talking about light and dark halves of the month. I think it's talking about whether the moon is, how bright the moon is. As the pair of them together could not solve the question, they went to the master and with due salutation asked, saying, "Sir, at what time does what is called cold appear?" After the master had heard what they had to say, he said, "Brethren, in bygone days also I answered for you this same question, but your previous existences have become confused in your minds." And so saying, he told the story of the past. Once on a time, at the foot of a certain mountain, there were living together in one and the same cave two friends, a lion and a tiger. The Bodhisattva too was living at the foot of the same hill as a hermit. Now one day a dispute arose between the two friends about the cold. The tiger said it was cold in the dark half of the month, whilst the lion maintained that it was cold in the light half. It sounds to me like the tiger's right. As the two of them could not settle the question, they put it to the Bodhisattva, the hermit. He repeated this stanza. In light or dark half, whensoever the wind does blow, it is cold, for cold is caused by wind, and therefore I decide you are both right. Thus did the Bodhisattva make peace between those friends. When the master, having ended this lesson in support of what he had said as to his having answered the same question in bygone days, he preached the four truths, at the close whereof both of the elders won the fruit of the first path. The master showed the connection and identified their birth by saying, "Dark was the tiger of those days, light the lion, and I myself the ascetic who answered the question." Number 18 is called the Mataka Bhatta Jataka. A goat, which was to be sacrificed by a Brahmin, shows signs of great joy and great sorrow. It explains the reason for each motion. Brahmin is like a Indian priest. It's one of the 4 castes in India. It's the highest caste. Above what? Above soldiers or royals, merchants, and lower caste. If folk but knew. This story was told by the master while at Jatakamala about feasts for the dead. For at this time the folk were putting to death goats, sheep, and other animals, and offering them up as what is called a feast for the dead, for the sake of their departed kinsmen. Finding them thus engaged, the brethren asked the master, saying, "Just now, sir, the folk are taking the lives of many living creatures and offering them up as what is called a feast for the dead. Can it be, sir, that there is any good in this? No, brethren, replied the master. Not even when life is taken with the object of providing a feast for the dead does any good arise therefrom. In bygone days of the wise, preaching the truth from mid-air and showing the evil consequences of the practice, made the whole continent renounce it. But now, when their previous existences have been confused in their minds, the practice has sprung up afresh. And so saying, he told this story of the past. Once on a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, a Brahmin who was versed in the three Vedas and world famed as a teacher, being minded to offer a feast for the dead, had a goat fetched and said to his pupils, My sons, take this goat down to the river and bathe it. Then hang a garland round its neck, give it a pottle of grain to eat, groom it a bit and bring it back. Very good, said they, and down to the river they took the goat, where they bathed and groomed the creature and set it on the bank. The goat, becoming conscious of the deeds of its past lives, was overjoyed at the thought that on this very day it would be freed from all its misery, and laughed aloud like the smashing of a pot. Then, at the thought that the Brahmin, by saying it, would bear the misery which it had been borne, the goat felt a great compassion for the Brahmin, and wept with a loud voice. Friend goat, said the young Brahmins, your voice has been loud both in laughter and in weeping. What made you laugh and what made you weep? Ask me your question before your master. So with the goat they came to their master and told him of the matter. After hearing their story, the master asked the goat why it laughed and why it wept. Hereupon the animal, recalling its past deeds by its power of remembering its former existences, spoke thus to the Brahmin. In times past, Brahmin, I, like you, was a Brahmin versed in the mystic texts of the Vedas, and I, to offer a feast for the dead, killed a goat for my offering. All through killing that single goat, I have had my head cut off 500 times, all but one. There is a quote in the sutras somewhere, I believe, that says that generally karmic retribution, for the karma to be completely rectified or purified, it has to occur back to 500 times. This is my 500th and last birth, and I laughed aloud when I thought that this very day I should be freed from my misery. On the other hand, I wept when I thought how, whilst I, who for killing a goat had been doomed to lose my head 500 times, was today being freed from my misery, you, as a penalty for killing me, would be doomed to lose your head, like me, 500 times. Thus it was out of compassion for you that I wept. Fear not, goat, said the Brahmin, I will not kill you. What is this you say, Brahmin, said the goat. Whether you kill me or not, I cannot accept death today. I cannot escape death today. Fear not, goat, I will go about with you to guard you. Weak is your protection, Brahmin, and strong is the force of my evil-doing. Setting the goat at liberty, the Brahmin said to his disciples, Let us not allow anyone to kill this goat. And accompanied by the young men, he followed the animal closely about. The moment the goat was set free, it reached out its neck to browse on the leaves of a bush growing near the top of a rock. And that very instant a thunderbolt struck the rock, rending off a mass which hit the goat on the outstretched neck and tore off its head. And people came crowding round. In those days the Bodhisattva had been born a tree fairy in that self-same spot. By his supernatural powers, he now seated himself cross-legged in mid-air, while all the crowd looked on, thinking to himself, if these creatures only knew the fruit of evil-doing, perhaps they would desist from killing. In his sweet voice he taught them the truth in this stanza. If folk but knew the penalty would be, birth unto sorrow, living things would cease. From taking life, stern is the slayer's doom. Thus did the great being preach the truth, scaring his hearers with the fear of hell, and the people hearing him were so terrified at the fear of hell that they left off taking life. So some of the teachings in Buddhism are, for better or for worse, like this, like some of the teachings of the three visions, 3 levels of spiritual perception are talking about doing this will lead you to this hell, doing this will lead you to that hell, that type of thing. And these were meant for a certain type of person that needed to hear that in that way. Perhaps in these days we need to focus more on things like building community and things like that. But the teachings definitely are there, the traditional ones. And the Bodhisattva, after establishing the multitude in the commandments by preaching the truth to them, passed away to fare according to his deserts. The people too remained steadfast in the teaching of the Bodhisattva and spent their lives in charity and other good works, so that in the end they thronged the city of the Devas. That's the end of the story. Then it says, his lesson ended, the master showed the connection and identified the birth by saying, in those days I was the tree fairy. So another life he spent, not as a very famous teacher, but definitely making an impression on some people's lives and teaching not an ordinary subject, like one, but one that was meaningful for them. So thank you all for your patience with reading through these. It definitely does require a bit of patience and focus, listening to reading these in this way. As far as I know, they haven't made cartoons or comics of these stories. Maybe one day, because I have heard that they did make such a cartoon of the Mahabharata, the great epic of India, which has stories similar to this. They have some of the language is quite similar in the Mahabharata. It's like an epic, and it's just extraordinary in how much detail it goes into. And I'm reading an English translation of it. I just read a few pages a day, every evening. And it'll just talk about this particular king, and this happens here. And but there's no theme of being like a Jataka, like there's no theme of one person. Like in this, the protagonist, the main character, is always the Buddha, really, isn't it? But there's no such thing really in the Mahabharata. But in some ways it's similar. Old-fashioned stories from India. Something that we must have a karmic connection to. Number 19 is called the Arya Jataka, offering sacrifice to get release from a vow. It is not true release. This is a short one. Take thought of life hereafter. This story was told to the master while at Jetavana about the offering of a sacrifice under vow to gods. Tradition says that in those days folk, when going on a journey on business, used to slay living creatures and offer them as a sacrifice to gods, and set out on their way after making this vow. If we come safely back with a profit, we will give you another sacrifice. And when they did come safely back with a profit, the idea that this was all due to gods made them slay a number of living creatures and offer them up as sacrifice to obtain a release from their vow. When the brethren became aware of this, they asked the Blessed One, saying, "Can there be any good in this, sir?" The Blessed One told this story of the past. Once on a time in the Kasi country, the squire of a certain little village had promised a sacrifice to the fairy of a banyan tree which stood at the entrance to the village. Afterwards, when he returned, he slew a number of creatures and betook himself to the tree to get released from his vow. But the tree fairy, standing at the fork of its tree, repeated this stanza. Take thought of life hereafter when you seek release For this release is bondage strict. Not thus the wise and good release themselves. For this the fool's release in bondage ends. Thenceforth men refrained from such taking of life, and by walking in righteousness thronged thereafter the city of the Devas. His lesson ended, the master showed the connection and identified the birth by saying, I was the tree fairy of those days. Number 20. Wow. Nalapana Jataka. Thirsty monkeys came to a pool haunted by an ogre. Their leader miraculously blows knots out of the canes, and with these the monkeys safely slake their thirst. I found the footprints, so the story says. This story was told by the master whilst journeying on an alms pilgrimage through Kosala. When he had come to the village of Nalakapana, cane drink, and was dwelling at Ketakavana near the pool of Nalakapana, about cane sticks. In those days the brethren, after bathing in the pool of Nalakapana, made the novices get them cane sticks for needle cases. But finding them hollow throughout, went to the master and said, Sir, we had cane sticks got in order to provide needle cases, and from top to bottom they are quite hollow. Now how can that be? Brethren, said the master, such was my ordinance in times past, times gone by. And so saying, he told this story of the past. In past times, we are told, there was a thick forest on this spot, and in the lake here dwelt a water ogre who used to devour everyone who went down into the water. In those days the Bodhisattva had come to life as the king of monkeys, and was as big as the fawn of a red deer. He lived in that forest at the head of a troop of no less than 80,000 monkeys, whom he shielded from harm. Thus did he counsel his subjects. My friends, in this forest there are trees that are poisonous and lakes that are haunted by ogres. Mind to ask me first before you either eat any fruit which you have not eaten before, or drink of any water which you have not drunk before. Certainly, said they readily. One day they came to a spot where they had never visited before. As they were searching for water to drink after their day's wanderings, they came onto this lake. But they did not drink. On the contrary, they sat down watching for the coming up of the Bodhisattva. When he came up, he said, Well, my friends, why don't you drink? We waited for you to come. Quite right, my friends, said the Bodhisattva. Then he made a circuit of the lake. He scrutinized the footprints around, with the result that he found that all the footsteps led into the water, and none came up again. Without doubt, thought he to himself, this is the haunt of an ogre. So he said to his followers, You are quite right, my friends, in not drinking of this water, for the lake is haunted by an ogre. When the water ogre realized that they were not entering his domain, he assumed the shape of a horrible monster with a blue belly, a white face, and bright red hands and feet. In this shape he came out from the water and said, Why are you seated here? Go down into the lake and drink. But the Bodhisattva said to him, Are you not the ogre of this water? Yes, I am, was the answer. Do you take as your prey all those who go into the water? Yes, I do. From small birds upwards. I have never let anything go which comes down into my water. I will eat the lot of you too. But we shall not let you eat us. Just drink the water. Yes, we will drink the water and yet not fall into your power. How do you propose to drink the water then? You think that we shall have to go down to the water to drink, whereas we shall not enter the water at all, but the whole 80,000 of us will take a cane each and therewith from your lake as easily as we could through the hollow stalk of a lotus. So they got straws. And so you will not be able to eat us. And he repeated the latter half of the following stanza, the first half being added by the master when as Buddha he recalled the incident. I found the footprints all laid down, none back. With canes we'll drink, you shall not take my life. So saying, the Bodhisattva had a cane brought to him. Then, calling to mind the 10 perfections displayed by him, he recited them in a solemn asseveration and blew down the cane. Straightway the cane became hollow throughout, without a single knot being left in all its length. In this fashion he had another and another brought and blew down them. But if this were so, he could never have finished, and according to the foregoing sentence, must not be understood in this literal sense. So it says in brackets. Next the Bodhisattva made the tour of the lake, and commanded, saying, "Let all canes growing here become hollow throughout." Now, thanks to the great virtues of the saving goddess of the Bodhisattvas, their commands are always fulfilled. And thenceforth every single cane that grew round that lake became hollow throughout. It's got a paragraph in brackets here. In this kappa, in Pali, or kalpa in Sanskrit, or era, eon, there are 4 miracles which endure throughout the whole era. What are the 4? Well, first, they're the sign of the hare on the moon. That is, it looks like a moon when you, looks like a rabbit when you look at the full moon from India, which will last through the whole era. That's supposedly a miracle. Secondly, the spot where the fire was put out as told in the Vataka Jataka, which is a future one, number 35, which shall remain untouched by fire throughout the era. Thirdly, on the site of Gatikara's house, no rain shall ever fall while this era lasts. And lastly, the canes that grow around this lake shall be hollow throughout during the whole of the era. Such are the 4 era miracles, as they are called. After giving this command, the Bodhisattva seated himself with a cane in his hands. All the other 80,000 monkeys too seated themselves round the lake, each with a cane in his hands. And at the same moment, when the Bodhisattva sucked the water up through his cane, they all drank too in the same manner as they sat up on the bank. This was the way they drank, and not one of them could the water ogre get, so he went off in a rage to his own habitation. The Bodhisattva too, with his following, went back into the forest. So ends the story. When the master had ended his lesson and repeated what he had said as to the hollowness of the canes being the result of a former ordinance of his own, he showed the connection and identified the birth by saying, Devadatta was the water ogre of those days, my disciples were the 80,000 monkeys, and I was the monkey king, so fertile in resource. So I've just got another 15 minutes thereabouts. Just do a few more. Number 21 is called the Kurunga Jataka. Another short one. A hunter up a tree throws down fruits to lure a deer within aim. The deer detects the artifice and escapes. It's called The Antelope Knows Well. This story was told by the master while at the bamboo grove about Devadatta. For once when the brethren were gathered together in the hall of truth, they sat talking reproachfully of Devadatta, saying, Sirs, with a view to destroy the Buddha with a view to destroy the Buddha, Devadatta hired bowmen, hurled down a rock, and let loose with the elephant Dhanapalaka. In every way he goes about to slay the Lord of Wisdom. Entering and seating himself on the seat prepared for him, the master asked, saying, Sir, what is the theme you are discussing here in the conclave? Sir, was the reply, we were discussing the wickedness of Devadatta, saying that he was always going about to slay you. Said the master, It is not only in these present days, brethren, that Devadatta goes about seeking to slay me. He went about with the like intent in bygone days also, but was unable to slay me. And so saying, he told this story of the past. Once on a time, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva came to life as an antelope and used to live on fruits in his haunts in the forest. At one period he was subsisting on the fruit of a sepani tree. I'm not sure what that is. and there was a village hunter whose method was to build a platform in trees at the fruit of which he found the track of deer, and to watch aloft for their coming to eat the fruits of the trees. When the deer came, he brought them down with a javelin and sold the flesh for a living. This hunter one day marked the tracks of the Bodhisattva at the foot of the tree and made himself a platform up in the boughs. Having breakfasted early, he went with his javelin into the forest and seated himself on his platform. The Bodhisattva too came abroad early to eat the fruit of that tree, but he was not in too great a hurry to approach it. For, thought he to himself, sometimes these platform-building hunters build themselves platforms in the boughs. Can it be that this can have happened here before? Can have happened here? And he halted some way off to reconnoitre. Finding that the Bodhisattva did not approach, the hunter, still seated aloft on his platform, threw fruit down in front of the antelope. Said the latter to himself, "Here's the fruit coming to meet me. I wonder if there is a hunter up there." So he looked and looked, till he caught sight of the hunter in the tree, but, feigning not to have seen the man, he shouted, "My worthy tree, hitherto you have been in the habit of letting your fruit fall straight to the ground, like a pendant creeper. But today you have ceased to act like a tree, and therefore, as you have ceased to behave as becomes a tree, I too must change and look for food beneath another tree." And so saying, he repeated this stanza. The antelope knows well the fruit you drop. I like it not, some other tree I'll seek. Then the hunter from his platform hurled his javelin at the Bodhisattva, crying, "Be gone, I've missed you this time." Wheeling round, the Bodhisattva halted and said, "You may have missed me, my good man, but depend on it, you have not missed the reward of your conduct, namely the 8 large and the 16 lesser hells and all the 5 forms of bonds and torture." With these words, the antelope bounded off on its way, and the hunter too climbed down and went his way. When the master had ended this discourse, and had repeated what I had said about Devadatta's going about to slay him in bygone days, he showed the connection, and identified their birth by saying Devadatta was the platform hunter of those days, and I myself the antelope. If we manage to resolve something with someone close to us in one lifetime, maybe these examples are showing how many lifetimes that difficulty could have been there as a potential. Number 22 is called the Kukura Jataka. Carriage straps having been mauled by palace dogs, a king orders all other dogs to be killed. The leader of a pack of dogs reveals the truth by causing an emetic to be applied to the royal dogs of the palace. The dogs that in the royal palace grow. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about acting for the good of kinsfolk, as will be related in the 12th book in the Bodhisattva Jataka. It was to drive home that lesson that he told this story of the past. Once on a time, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the result of a past act of the Bodhisattva was that he came to life as a dog and dwelled in a great cemetery as the head of several hundred dogs. Now one day, the king set out for his pleasaunce in his chariot of state drawn by milk-white horses, and after amusing himself all the day in the grounds, came back to the city after sunset. The carriage harness they left in the courtyard still hitched on the chariot. In the night it rained, and the harness got wet. Moreover, the king's dogs came down from the upper chambers and gnawed the leather work and straps. Next day they told the king, saying, "Sire, dogs have got in through the mouth of the sewer and have gnawed the leather work and straps of your majesty's carriage." Enraged at the dogs, the king said, "Kill every dog you see." Then began a great slaughter of dogs, and the creatures, finding that they were being slain whenever they were seen, repaired to the cemetery of the Bodhisattva. "What is the meaning," asked he, "of your assembling in such numbers?" They said, "The king is so enraged at the report that the leather work and straps of his carriage have been gnawed by dogs within the royal precincts that he has ordered all dogs to be killed. Dogs are being destroyed wholesale, and great peril has arisen." Thought the Bodhisattva to himself, "No dogs from without can get into a palace so closely watched. It must be the thoroughbred dogs inside the palace who have done it. At present, nothing happens to the real culprits, while the guiltless are being put to death. What if I were to discover the culprits to the king, and so save the lives of my kith and kin?" He comforted his kinfolk by saying, "Have no fear, I will save you. Only wait here till I see the king." Then, guided by the thoughts of love and calling to mind the 10 perfections, he made his way alone and unattended into the city, commanding thus, "Let no hand be lifted to throw stick or stone at me." Accordingly, when he made his appearance, not a man grew angry at the sight of him. The king, meantime, after ordering the dog's destruction, had taken his seat in the hall of justice, and straight to him ran the Bodhisattva, leaping under the king's throne. The king's servants tried to get him out, but his majesty stopped them. Taking heart a little, the Bodhisattva came forth from under the throne, and bowing to the king, said, "Is it you who are having the dogs destroyed?" "Yes, it is I." What is their offence, King of Men?" "They have been gnawing at the straps and the leather covering my carriage." "Do you know the dogs who actually did the mischief?" "No, I do not." "But, your majesty, if you do not know for certain the real culprits, it is not right to order the destruction of every dog that is seen." "It was because dogs had gnawed at the leather of my carriage that I ordered them all to be killed." "Do your people kill all dogs without exception, or are there some dogs who are spared?" "Some are spared, the thoroughbred dogs of my own palace." "Sire, just now you were saying that you had ordered the universal slaughter of all dogs wherever found, because dogs had gnawed the leather of your carriage, whereas now you say that the thoroughbred dogs of your own palace escaped death. Therefore you are following the 4 evil courses of partiality, dislike, ignorance, and fear. Such courses are wrong and not king-like. For kings, in trying cases, should be as unbiased as the beam of a balance. But in this instance, since the royal dogs go scot-free while poor dogs are killed, this is not the impartial doom of all dogs alike, but only the slaughter of poor dogs." And moreover, the great being, lifting up his sweet voice, said, "Sire, it is not justice that you are performing." And he taught the truth to the king in this stanza. "The dogs that in the royal palace grow, the well-bred dogs so strong and fair of form, not these but only we are doomed to die. Here's no impartial sentence meted out, to all alike 'tis slaughter of the poor." After listening to the Bodhisattva's words, the king said, "Do you in your wisdom know who it actually was that gnawed the leather of my carriage?" "Yes, sire." "Who was it?" "The thoroughbred dogs that live in your own palace." "How can it be shown that it was they who gnawed the leather?" "I will prove it to you." "Do so, sage. Then send for your dogs, and have a little buttermilk and kusa grass brought in." The king did so. Then said the great being, "Let this grass be mashed up into the buttermilk and make the dogs drink it." The king did so, with the result that each several dog, as he drank, vomited, and they all brought up bits of leather. "Why, it is like a judgment of a perfect Buddha himself," cried the king overjoyed, and he did homage to the Bodhisattva by offering him the royal umbrella. But the Bodhisattva taught the truth in the 10 stanzas on righteousness in the Tesakuna Jataka, beginning with the words, walk righteously, great king of princely race." Then, having established the king in the 5 commandments, that's the first 5 precepts of a layperson, and having exhorted his majesty to be steadfast, the Bodhisattva handed back to the king the white umbrella of kingship. At the close of the great being's words, the king commanded that the lives of all creatures should be safe from harm. He ordered that all dogs from the Bodhisattva downwards should have a constant supply of food, such as he himself ate, and, abiding by the teachings of the Bodhisattva, he spent his life long in charity and other good deeds, so that when he died, he was born in the Deva heaven. The dog's teaching endured for 10,000 years. The Bodhisattva also lived to a ripe old age, and then passed away to fare according to his deserts. That ends the story. When the Master had ended this lesson and had said, "Not only now, brethren, does the Buddha do what profits his kindred. In former times also he did the like." He showed the connection and identified the birth by saying, "Ananda was the king of those days. The Buddha's the followers were the others, and I myself was the dog." That's interesting that the Buddha had an apparently lower birth than the others in that birth. So, as I mentioned, we're getting through a good 20 pages each week with this, which is very good. Just mark the page we're up to. I've actually read all these myself when I acquired an edition of the Pali Canon in its 33 volumes from the Pali Text Society about 5 years ago, I think. Yeah, 4 years ago. I couldn't work out where to start, and there was no real ordering of the books. So I just decided to start with the Jatakas, and I've read all. There's 3 volumes of these hardback books, and there's a good 500 or so stories. But it definitely helps me reading them out aloud and trying to make deeper sense in them, and leaves a deeper impression in me. So as I mentioned before, thank you for your patience in listening, and we've got one more week next week, and that'll end the teachings for the year. So let's do the dedication of merits. By this merit may we overcome the defilements and gain omniscience. May I liberate all beings from the ocean of birth, old age, sickness, death. Here in the Mahayana teachings, whatever merit I have accrued, may all beings become stainless vessels to hold the Mahayana teachings. Courageous Manju, she knew all things, and Samantabhadra did likewise, knowing all of their examples. I shall dedicate all these merits. May the excellent Bodhicitta take birth where it had not yet done so. Where it has been born, may it increase freely without degeneration. Thanks for your company, everyone. See you next week.